Hello and welcome to OLA 2020. Thank you so much for joining us in this session, This is What a Cataloger Looks Like. My name is Rebecca Lynham. I was the conference planning chair for this year's conference, and I am so happy to moderate this session. I am joined by our session's presenters, Jen Donner, Danielle Shreve, and Elizabeth Skirpin. Jennifer earned her MLIS from the University of Oklahoma in 2013 and also holds a Master of Educational Leadership from Eastern Michigan University. She has been the Special Collections Librarian at the University of Tulsa for 6 years, focusing on cataloging bibliographic materials, stacks maintenance, and collection development. In her spare time, Jennifer enjoys reading mystery books, listening to paranormal and crime podcasts, and spending time with her cats and husband. She also enjoys all things nerdy, including playing video games on a variety of consoles, reading comic books, and watching Doctor Who and superhero movies. Danielle is a Librarian 1/cataloging librarian at Stillwater Public Library. She has a Level 3 certificate with a distinction as a public librarian through the Oklahoma Certification of Public Librarians with the Oklahoma Department of Libraries. She has a BS with a major in economics from Oklahoma State University. Her responsibilities include cataloging and classifying print and non-print library materials, assisting with acquisitions, collection maintenance and deselection, and maintenance of the ILS. Some of the special projects Danielle has been involved with include technology planning, safety and disaster planning, social events planning, a library recycling program hosting the 4-Star Book Club, and leading Tai Chi for Better Balance through an OSDH and CDC grant since 2017. She has served as a team member on the City of Stillwater Safety Committee and a representative for the Disaster and Safety Committee for the Stillwater Public Library. Prior to working for the City of Stillwater, Danielle was director of Perry Carnegie Library and participated with Public Libraries Directors Council. She has been a member of Oklahoma Libraries Association since 2001 and served as secretary for Public Libraries Division under Linda Reynolds in 2007 and 2008. Danielle has participated with Technical Services Roundtable Planning Committee since April 2007, serving as secretary, vice chair in 2013 under Kathy Blackman, and chair in 2014. She is married to Terry Shreve, a civil engineer for the Oklahoma Department of Transportation. The Shreves have 2 children who have graduated from Oklahoma State University, and Terry and Danielle have taken up ballroom dancing as a hobby. Elizabeth is a double graduate of the University of Oklahoma, completing a Bachelor's of Journalism with a focus in professional writing in 2014, and completing a Master's of Library and Information Studies with a focus on academic librarianship and information theory in 2017. Elizabeth has also completed a variety of certificates, including a certificate in project management from Tulsa Community College, a certificate in consumer health and information specialization from the Medical Library Association, and a certificate in disaster information specialization from the Medical Library Association. She works at the University of Tulsa McFarland Library as the Director of Bibliographic Services and as a fierce library advocate, volunteers to help other libraries review their cataloging workflows and LGBTQ+ collection development tactics. Elizabeth is the current chair of the Technical Services Roundtable within OLA and is the president-elect for the Lambda chapter of Beta Phi Mu. She is an alumna of OLA Gold, the 2019 cohort, and is an incoming cohort member for the Mountain Plains Library Association Leadership Institute in 2021. In her sparse downtime, Elizabeth enjoys renovating her mid-century home and spending time with her husband, 2 rescue dogs, her rescue cat, and her foster cats. So I will be back at the end of the session with some questions for our presenters, but now I want to turn it over to Jen to start off our presentation.
I will be popping in really quickly. This is Elizabeth, and I will be your moderator, moderating in place of Jenny Bodenhammer, who couldn't join us today. So our first question is, how did you become a librarian and discover cataloging?
This is Jen, and I guess my first thing was the first time I ever had a job was as a page at the public library in my library system in Michigan. And this got me really interested in libraries and helping patrons and, you know, all of the ins and outs of public librarianship. However, when I went to do my undergraduate degree in history at Lake Superior State University, I worked in the periodicals and government documents section of my college library. And so this gave me a little experience on the back end. It gave me my first experience with an ILS program of Voyager, as I had to inventory the entire periodicals collection to make sure it was all correct in Voyager when they kind of put all their catalog onto it. This was the end of the 1990s, early 2000s, so things were still a little kind of up in the air using online resources for patrons. So that was a little bit of the experience that I'd gotten. And then for cataloging, it's kind of something that I just fell into when I went to graduate school for archives. I decided that I wanted to be a special collections librarian slash cataloger to make it easier for researchers to find print materials that they could use in their research. And so that's just kind of, I just kind of fell into cataloging. I'm not a trained cataloger. I didn't take the cataloging class in library school, but I do feel that I was kind of a born cataloger.
Thank you, Jen. Danielle, would you like to speak next? And I apologize, Danielle, you were muted still.
There we go. Sorry. Hi, I'm Danielle Shreve. I grew up in Broken Arrow and visited the Broken Arrow Public Library almost every week growing up, and I loved the librarian reading. I attended Oklahoma State University, and I never even thought about a degree in library science. Oklahoma State had that degree back then. There was someone on my college floor that was majoring in library science, and I at the time I thought, oh, how cool, but I still never thought, oh, I'm going to change my major. But my first library job was in 1997. We moved from Tulsa to Seminole in 1997, and the Seminole public school system was hiring a kindergarten aide, but specifically that position was in a kindergarten library. So I taught phonics, we read, we acted out books, I taught computer skills, and then we were in Seminole for 3 years, and then in 2000 we moved to Stillwater, and Perry Carnegie Library was looking for a director. The Perry is 30 minutes away from Stillwater, so I worked at Perry Carnegie Library for 5 years, and I learned about importing records, and I learned about MARC records as part of my job in a small library. And just that information gave me the confidence to interview for the cataloger job in Stillwater in 2000, in 2005. So in 2006, January 2006, I joined Stillwater Public Library as the cataloger. But before I started working in Stillwater, I did go through the Oklahoma Department of Libraries certification classes. They are requirements set forth in the Oklahoma Certification Manual for Public Libraries, and so I became a certified librarian with distinction at that point. I have been here in Stillwater for 14 years. I've continued my certification with distinction every 3 years by earning CEUs. And in 2022, I will have 18 years of certification with distinction and will earn a lifetime certificate. Won't have to turn in those CEUs every 3 years. So that's who I am, and where I am now.
Thank you so much, Danielle. And this is Elizabeth. So I sort of had a quirky start getting to cataloging, and I think it's pretty untraditional compared to most of my peers in the field. I was hired in, I believe, 2007, 2008 now, at a major retail store, working in their records management area. I had just won a state award for an investment program, and my supervisor invited me to come and work in their records management office and said, we believe that you have the financial know-how to help us balance our books, but we also think that you have the ability to not share social security numbers, and that's what we're looking for. And so I worked there for 3 to 4 years, predominantly managing employee records, social security numbers, employee reviews, and I did daily safe counts and deposits and maintained our stores overall numbers, made sure everyone got paid every week, all that good stuff. And then I went to university and sort of was looking for a clerical type job because that's what I had been used to doing, and was immediately hired at the Carl Albert Center Congressional Archives because they were looking for someone who had some records management experience that could help them redact several 100,000 social security numbers off of order forms. So long story short, in the 1970s, the congressional purchases, you had to write down your social security number if you were an office staffer to make a purchase. And so every single one of those had to be redacted, since it was assumed that many of the individuals we would be encountering in our collection were still alive, and we didn't want to compromise their personal safety or their financial safety. So I spent about a year or two redacting social security numbers, and I don't know that will ever regrow the nerve endings in my fingertips from using a Sharpie in all that time. But after that point, they wanted to keep me on, even though they didn't really have anything for me to do along the lines of redactions. And so I started helping to process and describe the collections. And I also, for a brief period there, sort of managed their social media and really could only utilize the photos that we had cataloged. And so sometimes that meant I had to catalog some of our photos. And so that was a really neat experience. And at that point, I was still hoping to be a journalist, and really decided that I enjoyed the research process. I liked working with our researchers, and I really enjoyed describing the items in our collection and sort of getting to have those aha moments as we were uncovering things that we were processing. So I decided to go to graduate school to become an archivist, which, surprise, surprise, did not work out. I ultimately decided that wasn't really what I wanted to do. But during grad school, I was hired in the acquisitions department at the University of Oklahoma and was really reviewing e-resources holdings compared to our contract statements and finding inaccuracies between the two. And then I would review the catalog records for the e-resources, and sort of was taking cataloging and records management classes simultaneously while working here, and really enjoyed sort of the hunt of fixing records and finding problems and then fixing those so they were just easier to utilize, especially for students at the university. So simultaneously, towards the end of my tenure at OU, I was hired as the catalog and metadata librarian at Tulsa Community College, and was initially hired as a reference and instruction librarian that was working part-time. So I'd spend half my week in Norman at OU and half my week in Tulsa at TCC. And I had been there about a month when the catalog and metadata librarian at TCC went on leave. And so they asked if I could help out a little bit with some of the copy cataloging and some of the original cataloging, because I had experience doing that and was quite comfortable with it. And then when he ultimately retired that following January, I was invited to apply for the full-time position. So after that time, I did work there full-time for several years, and then I was hired at the University of Tulsa as the Director for Bibliographic Services this past February, even though I have spent a tad more time working at home these days than I anticipated when I was first hired there. But I think that's predominantly my journey. So our next question, starting again with Jen, is what does cataloging look like at your institution?
Well, I'm in a bit of a specialized department as I work for special collections and university archives at University of Tulsa. So my cataloging, I would say predominantly 80% of it is copy cataloging, but we do have a large amount of rare and hard to find books that require original cataloging. especially we have a large collection of James Joyce books, and which means we collect it in every language. So we have quite a few international languages, Japanese, Korean. He's been published in pretty much everything. Russian, Cyrillic, it's kind of crazy. But I also don't just catalog print materials such as books in, magazines or journals, that kind of thing. I've also had to catalog, well, my very first thing that I cataloged when I got hired in 2013 was a menu from a lunch in Paris for James Joyce's Ulysses. And so I had to catalog the menu, which was very interesting because it was signed by almost every poet and author that was, or artist that was at the luncheon. So it took quite a long time to figure out the signatures of each person so that I could put them into the cataloging record. So if we had a researcher researching a certain author, they would be able to find this menu. So we also catalog, sometimes I catalog CDs and DVDs and print manuscripts of, I guess they're pre-pubs. So it's just a lot of different things. We also, with our cataloging, use different fields than I would say that Elizabeth uses downstairs for the main stacks. We use a lot more of the 500 fields and a lot more 690 fields. So there's just I guess the details that we put in the books as well and how we shelve them are also a little different because we don't put stickers on the books. So we have to use little flags to put the barcodes on in the call numbers on. And sometimes we box them or we make folders or we put Mylar to help preserve the materials. So it's just, we do a little more work upstairs than I would think the normal regular stacks do.
Right. In Stillwater, we are a public library. Our ILS is through Cersei Dynex. In our office is called Technical Services, and we have a supervisor in Technical Services. Her name is Bela Valley. I am the cataloger, and Sherry Dunnigan is the processing librarian. We use the Dewey Decimal System for nonfiction books. Our books come straight into Technical Services in boxes. We unpack the books. We keep them in order by PO date. We work on holds first. Then we work on books by the PO date. We fit special projects in where we can, but we catalog forward and limit going back and redoing big jobs.
Thank you, Danielle. So I, as Jen mentioned, work in the basement of McFarland Library, so she's a couple floors above me. So our cataloging is predominantly copy cataloging, and we utilize RDA rules in order to catalog, but primarily what we're cataloging are going to be academic resources and the occasional popular resource, though we do occasionally do some original cataloging with theses and dissertations for the university. Overwhelmingly, something that I found was really interesting when I started working at TU is that our catalogers also do processing, which I've never seen before. And so part of our cataloging workflow is more or less to get a new book in. We utilize Sierra as our ILS. And so our catalogers find the record in Connection and WorldCat and then import it into Sierra. and then they clean up the record a little bit to help it fit into RDA's cataloging rules, even though we still have a large amount of records that are still under AACR1 or AACR2 is their cataloging rules. And then they process the book and bring it to me to just double check the cataloging records and make sure that everything is consistent. We occasionally handle some special projects and retrospective projects, but I think for the most part, the vast majority of what we do is sort of that copy cataloging process and finding items and then just uploading them into, or excuse me, downloading them into our Sierra ILS. So our next question is, how do you learn more and complete professional development as a cataloger? And once again, we will start off with Jen.
Well, I use a variety of different things. I try to find a lot of free webinars since we've had a lot of cutbacks on being able to pay for online classes and webinars and things like that. So free is always the best option if you can find it. I do take some online classes through different organizations and websites. Organizations that I primarily use because I'm in special collections is Society of American Archivists or Society of Southwest Archivists, which is our regional one. But I do also use ALA quite a bit. And since I've been working from home and being furloughed, I actually took a few courses on Coursera, which just to get the certificate is only like $49. So it's actually a really good deal. I just took one regarding helping researchers with data management during the research process so that eventually they can archive their data at the end, as a lot more funding sources are requiring that for grants and things. So I thought that would be something helpful that I can add to both my special collections researchers and possibly the University of Tulsa community when we come back to work in the fall. I also read quite a few of the latest articles and books as much as possible, just to kind of keep update on trends, such as moving from RDA to BibFrame in the future. I also have joined some listservs, and I actually use Facebook for work. And there's one group in particular that I really like called Troublesome Catalogers and Magical Metadata Fairies, which is really helpful sometimes when you have a weird cataloging question that comes up. You can post it in there, and then people all over the world can help you answer it. I really particularly like that. But just trying to stay up to date on the trends is the best bet, is looking through articles and checking out what kinds of online webinars and classes are going through. Also, seeing what presentations are being offered at various conferences can give you an idea of what you need to be focusing on to stay up to date with your professional development as a cataloger. Cataloging doesn't change a whole lot, but in the last, I'd say 15 to 20 years, it's actually started to change a bit more quickly, when we went from AACR2 to quickly going to RDA, and now they're already talking about BibFrame. Whereas, AACR2 was around for decades. So things are changing a little more quickly, I think, because of having catalogs available online, and trying to make it more user-friendly for our patrons.
Hi, I keep up my membership with Oklahoma Library Association. I attend TSRT meetings. The small talk that happens in the TSRT meetings, a person can learn a lot. Although I don't earn CEUs from just going to the meetings, but I do earn CEUs through the Oklahoma Library Association Annual Conference and the TSRT Fall Conference workshops. this past year, I joined ALA, and we recently purchased the ALA New Concept Series webinars on RDA. It's an introduction to the changes to RDA and the RDA toolkit. So I've been watching those webinars. There's a lot to take in. I feel like I'm going to have to watch it like several times before it maybe soaks in a little bit. That's what I do to complete professional development as a cataloger.
Thank you, Danielle. I think my biggest thing I've always gone for is free. I've always said free is my favorite four-letter word beginning with F, and I do everything possible that I can that falls under that realm of free. And so over the years, I've done the class audits on Coursera, on OCLC's, I believe it's called Web Junction. There's a whole series on basic cataloging. And so I've done those a couple of times over the years, just because I feel like there's so much great historic information in those that I can utilize. Anytime there is a free webinar over cataloging, I jump on that as soon as I can. I am involved in so many listservs online. And so I'm in coding for libraries, metadata librarians, AutoCAT. And anytime anyone posts anything about a free webinar or a free learning opportunity, a free ebook, I jump on it and try to review that as soon as I'm able. I really believe that involvement in professional associations and online communities is another big piece of sort of growing, especially as a cataloger. There's just so much historic information you have to be aware of, as well as what's currently going on and then where we're going, and it's also interconnected. And so I am involved in the Oklahoma Library Association, in TSRT, the MPLA, the Mountain Plains Library Association in their TSRT equivalent. I have over the years been involved on and off with ALA in their ALCTS sort of roundtable and their trainings. I am also, as Jen mentioned, am a member of the Troublesome Catalogers and Magical Metadata Fairies. And so I ask lots of questions on there if something isn't clear to me or if it doesn't make sense to me, and get help and find free resources that way. I frequently crawl through Google Scholar and I look to see what freely available or open access articles have recently been published on cataloging topics. Sometimes I will request articles through ILL and just try to get as much of that sort of involvement in our professional associations and seeing what's being generated and asking questions about it in my community to learn. I definitely try to utilize the wealth of free training online as often as possible. And as I mentioned, Web Junction is really fantastic for that, but I also have found that so many conferences and online webinars have been shared to YouTube. So there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cataloging trainings on copy cataloging, RDA, the transition of AACR2 to RDA, the transition of MARC records to BibFrame, MARC records and their history. So there is an innumerable amount of resources that are freely available. And then when you sort of need advanced and in-depth training, I think once you sort of reach the advanced cataloging level, or you start nitpicking some of our frameworks such as IFLA, LRM, or FRBR, FRAD, FRZAD, all those good frameworks, then I try to take in-depth training. And I try to find opportunities to get it paid for so I don't have to pay out of my own pocket. And so MPLA has a professional development grant that they offer that you can apply for. I believe it's every 2 years. I apply for grants and scholarships for professional development and continuing education. I ask my institution if it's something that they can pay for my training. And as a last resort, I do pay for my own training if I feel like it's really necessary to my understanding of a topic or continued growth in cataloging and metadata. So for example, right now I'm taking some classes in Library Juice Academy, and I did pay for those because they had a coupon code. And it was something I felt like I could justify in order to learn more. So our next question, beginning again with Jen, is what advice would you offer to those interested in becoming catalogers, picking up cataloging skills, or wanting to learn more about cataloging?
I guess first I would learn a little bit about the latest styles of cataloging, RDA, BibFrame. If you want to do special collections, you want to kind of learn a little bit about double and core. As Elizabeth mentioned, there's a lot of YouTube videos that you can check out to see if that's kind of something that you might be interested in. I would try to get some sort of experience, back-end experience with different ILS systems, probably especially Alma, since that seems to be what everybody is going towards in the future. Maybe try to volunteer somewhere that will let you actually do some copy cataloging. Copy cataloging is a little easier to learn than original cataloging, and it gives you a little bit of hands-on experience of what exactly the different codes mean, like what the different fields mean, excuse me. Or if you already work somewhere, ask someone who catalogs if they'll teach you. I know that actually right before Elizabeth started working, I had somebody down from her area come up and ask if I could teach them how to catalog, but I suggested they wait a little bit until we filled Elizabeth's position to see if maybe she would be more interested in doing that, or I could totally do it. But I feel that getting more hands-on experience than actually just taking a class is a lot more beneficial, because you're doing it so you understand a little more what the different fields mean, like where the title goes and where the author goes and where the subject headings go, and why is there, a list of the different chapters and book list, like where is it listed in the catalog. So just getting hands-on experience in some way, volunteering or watching videos is, I think, a very good place to start to learn more about cataloging.
Our ILS, Cersei Dynex, has courses. We are also encouraged to look at WebJunction. Joining TSRT, Technical Services Roundtable, has been probably the overarching biggest help for me. I was trained by my supervisor when I came to Stillwater Public Library, but I've learned so much from the small talk and camaraderie with other Technical Services Roundtable members at their meetings. Also, the fall workshops are very, very helpful. There are cataloging listservs that I read. One of them is through Cersei Dynex, and then there's also a listserv that through MarkEdit that I read, which is a cataloging. I'm going to talk about it in a minute. A cataloging tool that I use. Working in a small library, a person has to do a little bit of everything, and just like Jen suggested, doing some volunteer work. If you work in a small library, you're going to pick up some cataloging knowledge through whatever ILS system that they're using. So thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. I think to sort of echo what both Jen and Danielle have said already, I really think one of the best ways to learn cataloging is just by doing it. The history and the theory is really important in cataloging, and it really informs the decisions you make as a cataloger, but it really doesn't mean anything without practice and without going through those motions. And there are so many different steps and pieces to successfully cataloging an item that just getting in the habit of what to look for and how to input it into your ILS or into a MARC record will be the best training opportunity for you. I really think that if you would like to become a cataloger, asking a cataloger to teach you not only thrills the cataloger because so few people have interest in what we do, but it's an opportunity to learn by doing hands-on. And so you can ask someone in your place of work if they're willing to teach you a little bit more, or if they can let you let them shadow you, or vice versa. And you can volunteer. There are an innumerable amount of school libraries and other libraries in Oklahoma that are always looking for volunteers to help them get through a backlog, and they would be so excited to teach you and walk you through that process. Or you could practice with online records. MarcEdit is freely available, and you could ask a cataloger friend to sort of walk you through it the first couple of times, and then practice cataloging all the books in your home. So there are so many opportunities to do that. And I really think that cataloging right now is also in great flux. So as I mentioned, it's sort of important to understand the history and the theories behind it, but wherever you wind up as a cataloger, their process is going to be totally different from every other library out there. They may be using a combination of rules and records and ILSs that you've never seen before, and you can't possibly prepare for every single one of them. So just having familiarity with the big pieces like MARC records, RDA as a cataloging rule, and the Library of Congress authorities is a really good starting place, and then putting those into practice is a really good way to get started. And so our next question is, what is your biggest cataloging blunder?
Well, as I said previously, I kind of just fell into cataloging. So when I got this position, I'm not completely just a cataloger. I do other librarian things, helping researchers and things. So, so with that said, I guess the first thing that I did was when, because of a lot of our stuff is copy cataloging, bringing records over from WorldCat. In the beginning, I wasn't really good about researching and making sure that the Library of Congress number was correct from that WorldCat record, and correct for that book or that author, or if we already had a book with that call number in our catalog. So I would say 6 months to a year later, I went back and realized there was quite a few that I had to fix. An example would be, we have a very large Sherlock Holmes collection, and that was donated, and a few of the books here and there would be not in the correct spot with all the rest of the Sherlock Holmes books. It would be off somewhere in a completely different area, the P's. So I had to go back and fix that. So that was definitely one that I've learned that I've got to check call numbers before I move any record over into now we use Sierra, but at the time we were using Millennium. So basically, before I put it in our catalog, got to remember to double check call numbers to make sure they're correct. Also, with the PZs, that was another thing. We had quite a few of those that I had to go back. Last year, I actually fixed those. So we only have a handful of books that are in the PZs, whereas before, people were just using it as a catch-all. And that's not really what the PZs are used for. PZs are mostly children's literature. So that was definitely not correct for a special collections library.
I can relate to what Jen has to say. Yeah, it took me a while to learn to go to look and see where other books by the author were being cataloged, or other books on the subject. I was trying to think of a big blunder, and this was the very last question I finally came up with an answer for when I was working on this. Probably about 3 years ago, we as a technical services office agreed to catalog the graphic novels by series. So we were cataloging them by author, and they were in just their own area called comics, and a little sticker would go on them. So we would catalog them by author, and then this comic sticker would go on them. And so, yeah, the series were all over the place because different authors work on graphic novels, but it was also an easier cataloging job to do. So series can be confusing. We do have a Google Doc that a librarian developed, and she has listed each graphic novel that she's ordered and has listed the series, the overarching series name, and then the sub-series name. But even with that, it just takes a little bit of extra time to look up everything and see what series it's in. And if the person who ordered the graphic novel didn't add the series information, we email them. So it just takes a little bit more time to work on graphic novels. We also had the old comics sent back in workable bundles to redo the spine label if the book wasn't too old. So to add a little bit of more information about series, it's not just Spider-Man. It's Marvel Now, ! 2.0 Spider-Man, or Ultimate Marvel Spider-Man. There are overarching new series featuring the main character. Another one is Marvel Now 2.0. Let's see. I think I meant to say anyway. So there's always there's a new overarching series that are developed for these like Superman and Spider-Man and all the comic characters. And so that's how we are now cataloging these the graphic novels. It's by series. So we kind of wish that after we got into this project, we were like, oh, we wish that we hadn't said that we would do this.
I think one of my biggest cataloging blunders was one of my first major projects I oversaw. And I was told by several individuals that our children's collection, which sat on one of our 4 campuses, was in really bad shape. It didn't make a lot of sense. The call numbers were bad. The items weren't cataloged well. It was just a disaster to navigate. And so this being my first big project, I was like, all right, I'm going to go to this campus and pull every single one of these books and bring them back to our campus and recatalog every single one of them. And so I did do that and sustained a couple of injuries in the way, and definitely thought I dropped my phone down an elevator shaft getting the books to the car, and it was only vaguely traumatizing. And get the books back to my campus and thought I would let them sort of hang out in the back room for a day while I came up with a game plan to sort through these with the help of my copy cataloger, and that way we could get them back to their campus as quick as possible. Well, the copy cataloger took it upon herself to start working on this project before we were really even on the same page about what we would be doing and what we really needed to fix. And so I never had an opportunity, or I did not take the opportunity to really survey the collection like I should have. And then I did not communicate incredibly well to the copy cataloger not to touch anything that we would sort of work out together what to do. And so what ultimately happened with that collection was it was not a multitude of titles that were not cataloged correctly or had call number issues. It was 2 books that were written by Dr. Seuss. That we had a handful of books under Dr. Seuss's actual name and a handful of books under Seuss as the last name. And if I had taken the time to survey the collection, I would have just discovered this very quickly, and we could have fixed it very easily without pulling the books and the traumatizing cell phone elevator shaft incident. But what ultimately happened with that collection was the copy cataloger had started doing some things, and she couldn't remember what rules she had been following to work on the books, and I couldn't really distinguish what she had been doing to reclassify those books, and then I was doing something else. And so ultimately what happened with that collection is every single book got recatalogued, but half of them are under custom cutters and half of them are under their Library of Congress call numbers. And so it sort of created a giant big disaster that really could have been avoided if I had just taken the time to go through the collection or properly communicated. And so I really learned from that that taking the time to survey things yourself as a cataloger really goes a long way, because no one understands your collections and what they should look like when they're perfected more than you do. So rather than taking other people's word for it, taking the time to just do the research and survey and come up with a good game plan for fixing a problem gets you pretty far. So our next question is, what is your biggest cataloging pet peeve?
You have to change the slide. There we go. Well, I guess I don't really have a big pet peeve. I guess the only thing that I have a problem with is if we have, if I'm not the one cataloging a book and say my supervisor does it, or we have a volunteer, or we have somebody down from processing who is helping us with the project, and I go back and check their records, and you can usually tell that they didn't actually look at all the information in the book that they were holding in their hand and compared it to the record that they pulled from WorldCat to use in our catalog, to make sure that those actually correlated with each other and that the information was correct and that there weren't spelling mistakes or, you know, punctuation mistakes. Pretty much just not actually checking the record after they import it over, because not always everything imports correctly. Sometimes, especially if it's a foreign language, and has different, I guess, lettering, like Russian is an example. A few years ago, we had an issue where when we pulled records over, the Russian characters were not showing up correctly in our catalog. And if people had gone back and checked, we could have caught it a lot sooner. So it's just, I mean, it was an easy fix, but that is definitely one of the things that annoy me about cataloging, is when people don't check the records to make sure that everything is correct.
I guess my biggest cataloging pet peeve is when an author changes their authorized name, or I just recently ran into a series of books where there was a reissue of the book and they changed the illustrator. I was like, why did they do this? And I researched it, and I did find a article in Library Journal, and it said, what used to be sacrilege is now a common practice. So there will be a popular series of books, and they'll change the illustrator. So it's all okay. So, you know, we used to put a copy to book on, even if it was a little bit of a change on the same record. And so now with a new illustrator, we've kind of talked about it and have decided that it probably should have a separate record, since it's a different illustrator. So we've gone back and found books where the author has changed their authorized name. So a new book comes in, like in a children's book or something like that, and they're like, well, this used to be so-and-so. And so then we'll go and pull the book and change the spine label on the author. But that's just a pet peeve. So.
I think my biggest pet peeve is inconsistent application of policy. I've always sort of had the mindset that what we do for a customized local policy really is specific to whatever problems we're trying to fix or our patronage. But if we decide we're going to do something, we need to stick to it or not do it. So an example I have of that is at my previous institution, the copy cataloger came up with the idea to start adding volumized numbers to spine labels so students could see that this is book 1, book 2, book 3, etc. And then she decided to start doing it for DVDs as well, which sort of made sense to see season 1, season 2, season 3. It was very easy to grab from the shelves and see if you were, picking up season 1 or 3 of Game of Thrones or whatever the case may be. But it wasn't always consistent. And I sort of was of the mind that either way, whether we're going to add it or not add it, it really does need to be consistent. We don't need to have half of our DVDs say that there's season 1 or volume 1, but the other half of them not say that. And same thing with book series. And so we would have students say, well, the Harry Potter books have volumes 1 through 7, and I'm trying to find Lord of the Rings, but I'm not sure which one's volume which or which not, and they're all in different places on the shelves. So I think just consistent application of our policies or rules, whether we decide to make policies or rules that are customizable to our institution or not, goes a long way. And I'm remembering to advance the slides this time. What tools do you use during a typical day of cataloging? And what tools do you use for unusual cataloging?
Well, my electronic tools that I use is our ILS is Sierra, and then I use WorldCat when I'm copy cataloging or even when I'm original cataloging, because sometimes I can find very similar records on WorldCat for the item that's in my hand, even if it's not the exact title or edition. So I can use that to create records. And then obviously, well, I guess not obviously, I use OCLC connection to import the records from WorldCat into Sierra. But because I'm in special collections, I also use a software called Archive Space, where sometimes we have to use information that's put into Archive Space to catalog books that we get, because we use Archive Space to record all donations and purchases, just to keep track of for sessioning purposes. And then when I'm cataloging, I sometimes use Google to find information about a book. Sometimes we have some old books that we get in, or we've had, we have a huge backlog going back decades sitting on shelves that I'm slowly getting through. Sometimes we don't have a title page for these books. So sometimes if I use Google and I type in the first, sentence or two of the first page, it will actually come up and tell me what the book is. So that helps out quite a bit. I also, as I mentioned, catalog some foreign titles. So Google Translate is helpful sometimes with, especially Japanese or Korean or Chinese titles. Nowadays, they usually put an English, subtitle in there. But we have some books that are decades old, as I mentioned, and so there's no English in it at all. And so that's a little difficult. Google Translate is usually pretty helpful. I hardly ever have problems finding a foreign title through Google Translate. And then I guess just my hands-on tools, we only use pencils. We use special paper flags, low acidity or no acidic paper to put the call numbers in the books. And then I have people resources that I use to help kind of conserve and preserve the materials that we have. And that's all I can really think of.
I use a ruler. I will use Mark Edit. Mark Edit is a metadata editing software used primarily to create and manipulate MARC records. It's free open source software developed by Terry Reese. I only do the simplest things with Mark Edit. I am working on trying to do more things with it. I use Amazon.com. When I'm working with a children's book and I want to put in the reading level, Amazon.com usually has this information for the children's books. I use WebDewey, which is part of OCLC. It's a web access to the Dewey Decimal System. I use Blue Cloud Cataloging, which is a browser-based catalog system through Circe Dynex. I can compare bib records and drag and drop more fields, better fields into our existing record. I also will, if I have a question about where, is this the right call number, or did other libraries put this in this this nonfiction area, I'll look at Tulsa Library Systems catalog. I'll look at Metro's catalog. I'll look at Pioneer's catalog. I also use Goodreads for series information.
In terms of standard everyday cataloging, we utilize Connection, ClassWeb, Cataloger's Calculator, and the Library of Congress authority files. And if I'm sort of dealing with a problematic record or an item, I rely really heavily on WorldCat. I believe the cataloging is very much so based on the principle of stealing from other libraries, so you don't have to make it yourself. And so I will go into WorldCat to see what other libraries have done with the item record if I need more information to sort of get inspiration to fix the record in our own catalog. I utilize the RDA manual really frequently to determine how to enter in unique items or unusual items, especially those items that are a little bit older and they don't necessarily have good clean records in Connection or WorldCat. And I rely really heavily on the Troublesome Catalogers and Magical Metadata Fairies Facebook group to ask for help with quirky questions and problems. And I rely really heavily on the OCLC Mark 21 guides as well, especially when we're correcting a problem that's sort of localized or we need to develop a localized policy for. I will pop into that to get examples of what the record should look like or might look like if it is partially complete or predominantly incompleted. And that helps inspire some of my other work, just so I have a sort of rule book that I can follow without feeling like I'm making things up on the fly. What do you see as being the biggest trend in cataloging, or alternatively, what trends do you see sticking?
I would say right now, just from some of the readings that I've done since I've been working from home, definitely linked data is one trend that's coming up that I think is going to start sticking around a little more, just to make it more user-friendly for people trying to find materials in our catalogs. Adding more information to records, more subject headings, making records and catalogs more user-friendly, as I mentioned. I really think that the cataloging standards that we use are going to change a bit more, just because software seems to be moving quicker, and, updates and improvements and, things like that. So we're using RDA right now, but I definitely think that BibFrame is going to be where it's going to be at in 5 to 10 years once they finally get things figured out. But who knows, by the time they get BibFrame figured out, there might be something new after that. It just seems that things are moving very quickly, and it's all focused on user ability, user friendliness of our catalogs to make it easier for our patrons to find what it is that they're looking for. I know that there are records that I've updated since working at special collections where, because before it was based on the card catalog system, there are actually no subject headings. There's barely any information about the book at all. You're lucky if there's a title, author, and publishing year. So they're definitely going to be adding more information to these records to make it easier for people to find.
The trends that I thought about were cloud cataloging. Our ILS, Cersei Dynex, has developed Blue Cloud cataloging, and that's where I just spoke about it a minute ago, where you pull up a record. So you have to have holdings for a record to check other records with Blue Cloud. So let's say that I enter in the ISBN or a title of a record, and Blue Cloud cataloging will check to see if I have a holding, and if I do, it'll bring up other records that have that OCLC holds, and I can check that record and see if there's something else that needs to be added to ours. But so I call that cloud cataloging. And I see a lot of product development going on within Cersei Dynex with this platform. Another trend, I don't know if it's a trend, it's just been going on forever, is it quick and inexpensive? All libraries have to watch their costs, and tech services cataloging is the same. Another trend is digital collections and web visibility. Here at Stillwater Public Library, the digital collections we've been putting more time and money into this, and I know that other libraries have too. People want to see pictures of the past and what things look like, pictures of someone's hometown or their buildings, the people, the women's club, what people did, and investigate and research the past. So digital collections have helped in this area.
To echo a couple of the other things that both Jen and Danielle have said, obviously BibFrame is a massive trend, and I don't know whether its stickability is going to benefit it or not. There's a large group of catalogers who don't think that BibFrame will ever be implemented because it has too many issues. Cloud-based catalogs are obviously very popular. Most of us, as we upgrade our ILSs in the coming years, will go to a cloud-based catalog system. So that one's definitely here to stay. It's just easier and cost-effective for libraries to not have to pay to self-host or have an employee that knows how to self-host their own ILS. IFLA LRM as a content standard is here to stay. It's replaced FRBR, FRAD, and FRIZAD and some of the alternative content standards that have come out in recent years. So that is sort of being implemented and is being incorporated into RDA toolkit on a continual basis. They're always sort of adding new updates and more information about what that looks like in practice for catalogers. So that is here to stay as well. I really also see sort of the metadata trend in libraries. It is being implemented more and more. More libraries are stepping away from MARC 21 as their container standard and going towards a more metadata standard, whether that's XML or mods or something along those lines. There is a lot of desire to be more web adaptable and get towards that library catalog as a semantic web integration. So there are quite a few changes in cataloging. The possibility of them sticking, I really think, comes down to financial feasibility for the library and how many libraries can actually afford to transition from the old standard, whatever it may be, to the new standard. Obviously, the Library of Congress doesn't have to really take their budget into consideration, but for so many of us that do have to take our budget into consideration and have decreased staffing sizes and funding over the years, we won't be able to just hire a vendor to convert our records from a container or a rule format to something else. We're going to have to just decide one day that this is our new standard that we're following as a library, and we'll have a whole backlog of old records that don't fit into the new formats and our new stuff. And so I think that especially when you're talking about bib frame conversion, it's just not going to be financially feasible for most libraries unless an ILS decides to integrate that as being part of a service where they can convert them for you, which may be another trend that we see. And I think to sort of wrap up that question, really there's also more integration of outside services being utilized in technical services and bibliographic services departments because of our decrease in staff sizing and funding. So we're having to rely on outside sources to help us pick up the slack or help us clean up our records or our name authorities as we go, compared to what we would have done 20, 30 years ago with fully staffed and funded technical services departments. And so our last question in the slides is, in your opinion, what makes a cataloger a cataloger?
Well, as somebody who wasn't, officially trained or didn't take classes as a cataloger, I just kind of fell into it. I kind of feel that somebody who has a good eye for detail would make a good cataloger. You have to make sure that all the field information is correct, all the different little codes that you need to do. And as the others have mentioned, we need to make our records more searchable, more user-friendly. So somebody who doesn't mind kind of trying to think outside the box of what kind of subject headings you could use to add to those records to make them more findable. Somebody who doesn't mind how tedious the job can get. If you're working on a very large project, a lot of times it's just the same thing over and over and over again. And a cataloger kind of needs to be able to deal with that. And also somebody who can think how a researcher or library patron will use the catalog and able to adapt the records once again to go back to usability. I think those are definitely steps. Somebody who's going to advocate for the collection too, and try to understand what things need to be added to the collection and what things need to be weeded from the collection. Weeding, I know, is something that not all librarians like to do, but as libraries grow and change in the future, you need to be able to handle weeding and getting rid of lesser used materials.
I think being interested in informational services through MARC and metadata information would be a quality. Interested in enabling a person to find material by author, title, or subject, and having a real interest in that. Interested in showing what the library has by author, title, or subject. And being interested in assisting in choice. Another thing that makes a cataloger is I moved from, like I said, my first job in a library was in a kindergarten library, and I was working with children. Then I was a director of a small public library. So I worked in an office, but I also worked with the staff and the public. It was a very public job. As a cataloger in technical services here at Stillwater Public Library, I'm in an office that is separated from the main library. I couldn't tell you what's going on out in the library right now. During the summertime when we're having children's programming, there could be 100 children out in the library, and I would not even know about it. So at first, when I'll say the first 5 years that I worked here, I kind of had to question myself, like, what is this what I like? So that went on for a little while, but I do like it. I like working with records. I like looking at the subject headings. I like looking at the record to see if it looks good and is correct, and if it has the right punctuation, or if anything, if there's are any words that are misspelled in the abstract. So I do enjoy being a cataloger, and those are the things that I could think about that makes a cataloger a cataloger.
In my opinion, I think that a dedication to your patrons and understanding how they research and look for information is perhaps one of the most important qualities a cataloger can have. You really, at the end of the day, sometimes our work can feel like we are cataloging books, and that's sort of the job. And I think sometimes there's a disconnect between getting through your cart of books and who will ultimately be looking for those books. So really an emphasis on your patronage and what they're looking for and the sort of questions they'll have about an item is incredibly important. But definitely that sort of attention to detail and a willingness to problem solve and hunt down the right answer until you seek it out is also very important. I think being patient is also an important quality. Sometimes our work doesn't come easy, and sometimes you have to set something to the side and come back to it in a couple of days. But really just that dedication to making things available for our patrons, not only through the cataloging process, but through the OPAC, and making sure that records are as correct and as similar to navigate as one another is also very important. So thank you all for attending and listening. And at this point, we're going to turn it back over to Rebecca.
Well, Jen, Danielle, and Elizabeth, thank you all so much for presenting this session for OLA 2020. I loved it as a public library manager who has almost no experience in cataloging. I loved getting to kind of peek behind the curtain a little bit and get to learn more about the work that really does make it possible for us to serve all of our customers. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your thoughts and your, embarrassing blunders and your pet peeves, and making us all feel like maybe you're not infallible, but you're still completely amazing. So thanks so much for sharing. And to all of you watching, thank you so much for joining us in this session. If you enjoyed the session, please consider joining the Technical Services Roundtable. As you've heard multiple times from our presenters, this is an amazing support team for Oklahoma librarians in technical services. And the group offers great discussions and workshops around the subjects and issues that matter the most to those in technical services. And please remember to complete a session evaluation in the OLA Conference app to let us know how you enjoyed this session. And we hope you will join us for many more conference sessions. Thank you so much and have a great day.